Welcome, my name is Kevin Snyder, here for TETS Plus, and in this tutorial we're looking at part 2 of mapping DEM data. Now in part 1, this is what we created. We took DEM data that we could get online for free, we stitched it together, brought it into Cinema 4D, and applied our contour map texture to it, and then we added these mapping pins and our path along the pins. For part 2, we're going to take this exact same model and we're going to change the look just a little bit. We're going to go for this look here, this realistic look. And we're going to do this only using 5 textures. So we have a texture for the dirt, texture for the snow, and then we have a couple for the grass, and then we're going to populate this with quite a few trees. Okay, so this technique can be a lot of fun. It renders fairly quickly. So let's jump right in and take a look how we make this. Here we are in Cinema 4D and we're ready to start texturing our mountain. Now if you have not watched part 1 that shows you how to gather the DEM data, stitch it together, bring it into Cinema 4D and reduce the number of polygons, I really encourage you to watch that part to get to this starting phase here. So like I said, we're ready to start texturing it. Let's go ahead and create a texture. We're going to use the color channel, and under texture we're going to select fusion. And if we select on the fusion object here, we have a base channel and a blend channel. So the base channel is going to be our base channel for the mountain, so a texture that's going to make up the base. And so let's go ahead and load a texture, and I'm actually going to use this texture right here that is just dirt and rock. So we'll click it. And then we're also going to load a blend channel. So this is a channel that we're going to want to blend into our base channel, and for the blend channel we want the snow for the top of the mountain. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and load another image. And I have this picture of snow right here. You can see there's not a lot of detail in this picture, but we don't need a ton for what we're doing here. If you have an image with more detail, certainly it would work. We just don't want too much detail because we're going to tile it over a large area. Okay, now we want to use this mask channel here, and in order to enable that we need to select use mask, and I'm going to move my capture window down so you can see the other option here. So for the mask channel, we're going to come down here to effects and select train mask. Okay, let me move my capture window back up. Okay, now one thing I want to do before we get into the train mask is I want to come over here in Cinema 4D and create a plane. And we're going to make this thing fairly large. Okay, I have this so we can kind of get a better feeling for some of the elevations on our model here. And on the plane I'm going to right click and add a tag to this, and I'm going to choose a display tag. And we're going to use shading mode and just create lines. Okay, so that we can we can still see our model through the plane. I'm going to click this lower button here so that it's red, so that when we render, we will not see the plane in here. Alright, let's go back to our texture. And I'm going to try and make it so I can see everything here. And let's scoot this over. Alright, sorry about that, just trying to get so we can see everything. Alright, let's check out this terrain mask. And in the terrain mask for right now, I'm going to go ahead and actually turn off enable slope masking so we can just take a look at altitude. So for altitude, we set a minimum altitude and a maximum altitude that our blended channel can exist in. Okay, so our blended channel again is the snow, right? So if we just render this right now, oh, well, we got to apply the texture to our model. That would be helpful. So if we render this right now, we have snow applied to the entire scene. So we want to limit the area that we can have snow. Okay. All right, so if we come over here with the plane and we move this through our scene and we kind of pick an elevation that we want the snow to start, because I'm going for kind of a look where it's in the springtime, the snow's starting to melt a bit, and it's just focused mostly in the upper elevations. So I want a little bit of snow down in here, like right here where this plane is intersecting this ridge. Okay, I want a little bit down in there as well. So that'll be kind of nice. So for a minimum altitude, I'm going to try this right here, 144 centimeters. So that's the lowest that the snow can go. And then the maximum altitude is 1,000 centimeters. And if we come over here to our plane, our model only goes up to about 345 centimeters. So just to be consistent with our model here, I'm just going to change this to like 400. I could have easily left it at 1,000. We wouldn't have any problems there. Okay, so now if we render this, we can see we have snow limited to just this upper elevation. We can see that base channel coming through. Now obviously one problem is that the scale of this texture is way too large. So if I click on the texture over here, and let's change the length U to maybe 2% and the length V to 2%. Okay, now let's do a quick render, and we can see that this looks a lot better, right? Now we can see some patterns in that base channel, but that's okay because we're going to add more textures and be able to hide some of that. Now we can soften our min and our max. Now our maximum altitude, the snow goes all the way up to the top of the mountain, so the soften max isn't going to do anything. But soften min, if we crank this thing up and we do a quick render, you can see that gradient between the base channel and the blended channel is fairly large, right? So we don't want it quite that large. I'm going to make this maybe 2%, just so that that boundary between the snow and our base channel fades out a little bit. Maybe it gives it a little bit of a edge, like it's melting. We're in the springtime. Okay. Now the other powerful option here is noise height. So if we crank this up, we'll see in the preview that we start getting, instead of a straight line, we get noise along that boundary. And this is going to give us a much more realistic look as far as snow melting, right? Because snow never melts in a perfectly straight line. So that looks pretty good, and obviously we can change the scale. I'm going to bring that down maybe just a little bit. Okay, that looks good. Alright, next one is enable slope masking. So now we can adjust how much snow there is based on the steepness of our terrain. So I turn this on, and our minimum slope is 0, so it can be on flat, and then anything over 45 degrees it's not going to be on. So if I do a quick preview here, we can see now at the top of the mountain those really steep areas are bare, right? And I like that look. That looks good. If we crank this up and do another preview, you can see that now basically has no impact. So I'm going to take that back down to 45%. I like that look. Soften max, I'm going to go ahead and bring this down because I don't want it too soft. Okay, that looks good. Now if you ever are having problems with judging the elevations when using the terrain mask, I found that use global coordinates works out pretty well. Now I centered my model so that I'm not running into that problem, but I have had it occur over time. So sometimes use global coordinates will help you figure out the elevations a little bit more accurately instead of trying to guess. And right here with this noise, it looks like this noise height might be a little bit too much. So I'm going to bring this down just a little bit. See what we get there. Okay, that looks good. Okay, So now, what do we do with all this dirt? Because as much as I like the snow and I like the dirt, but we just have too much of it. We want to add some vegetation to this. So if we take a look at this fusion option here, we have our blend channel and our base channel and our mask channel, and we want to be able to add another layer of vegetation to our model. So let's take a look at another way to use the terrain mask. Okay, so I'm going to create a new texture, and for the color, I'm actually going to turn the specular off. For the color, we're going to use a free plugin, and I'm going to move my capture window down again so you can see the options. For the texture, we're actually going to use this right here, Tools 4D Collage Shader. Now this used to be a paid plugin, and now you can actually get it free, and this thing is really powerful. It's pretty awesome to be able to create textures here in Cinema 4D. So let me move my texture window or my capture window back up. And when we go in there, now we can create seamless textures right inside of Cinema 4D without having to go out into another program to create them. Okay, let me show you how this works. And I really encourage you to check out their website, check out the tutorials. It's surprisingly how many awesome things you can do with this plugin right here, right inside of Cinema 4D. So if I go to brushes, and here we're going to add images as our brushes. So I'm going to go ahead and add one brush, and I'm going to add this picture of grass. Say open, and you can see that it's multiplying that picture of grass. So if I come over here to shader, we have 10 copies. The minimum scale is 10%, the maximum scale is 30, and then it's going to rotate these as well. Okay, and we can go with seamless, we can go to full. Now, I want a little bit more variation, so let's go back to brushes and let's add a brush. And I'm going to add a second layer of grass. Okay, just to kind of mix it up so it's not the same throughout. So let's go over here to the shader, and I'm going to just crank this up, so, okay, to bring that density in. And I think I want the minimum scale just to be a little bit higher, and the maximum scale we can bring up to. Okay. So let's go ahead and add that to our model. Now, one thing that we need to do just like before, so I'm going to go ahead and close this. One thing we need to do just like before is change the scale of this. So let's change this down to 2% and 2%. Okay, and obviously we can see that that texture is applied to our whole model. So how can we get it to reveal our other texture that's underneath it? So let's go back and open it. And we're going to adjust the alpha channel. So under alpha, for the texture, we're going to use the terrain mask again. So effects, terrain mask. Okay, so we can use the terrain mask on the alpha channel to manage where that texture is being shown. So let's go in here, and I'm going to turn off enable slope masking. And if I come back to my plane and we move it down through our scene, I'm going to try and figure out maybe a good, what's the maximum height that I want this vegetation to go, right? Because I want a little bit of boundary between the snow and the vegetation. So I go snow, and then I'll see that rock layer, and then I'll see vegetation at the lower elevations. So let's take a look here. I don't know, maybe right there. What is this elevation? 125. So for a minimum, we can just say 0. I want it to go all the way down to the bottom. For a maximum, let's change this to 125 centimeters. And let's kind of see what that looks like there. Alright, that actually worked out pretty well. That's the kind of look that I was hoping for. Okay. Now, obviously, we need to add some noise to this because we have a perfectly straight line. So let's add some noise to this thing. And I'm going to go ahead and soften the max on this one. Okay, and that looks pretty good. I might bring the noise down just a little bit. Okay, definitely. All right, I like that. All right, so you can see that we can add multiple textures to this and just manipulate the alpha channel with the terrain mask, and we can just keep adding a lot of textures. Okay, another thing I want to add to our scene are trees. Okay, because it's really going to help sell this. I like what we have going on so far, but trees are going to really help bring everything together. Now, we could use actual tree models in this, but I want to use a ton of trees, and this is a fairly large model here. So I've tried this with tree models, but I cannot get the polygon count low enough for them to still look good and make the scene manageable. So for this, we're going to just use trees on cards in here and kind of, fake the look, but make it so that we can have a lot of trees and it's going to render fairly fast. So if we take a look at the texture, I have 2 trees on boards here. So these are TIFFs, and they have an alpha channel, right? And it doesn't look super great here. It doesn't look really realistic, but once we get them into the scene and adjust the lighting, we can make something that looks pretty decent. Okay, and if we look at the size here, they're 800 by 800. Okay, so our cards are square. And let's go over into Cinema 4D and see how we can use this. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create a plane, and I want the orientation to be -z. And let me just turn off our terrain for a minute. And we can go ahead and make this smaller because in relationship to our terrain, it's still fairly large. I'm just going to make this maybe 80 by 80. And we can obviously adjust it later. The segments, we'll just go 1 by 1. Okay. And if we zoom in here, let's go ahead and hit C on the keyboard. And then I'm going to hit L to go into the axis modification mode. And we're just going to move this down to the bottom of our plane here. Okay. And let's go ahead and go into MoGraph, and let's go ahead and add a cloner to this. And so let me change the name of this. Let's call this tree. And on our cloner, let's go ahead and make this an object. And we're going to bring in our 3D model. Now we want to change this to surface so that we can actually change how many trees that we have. Okay, and we want to make sure we turn off align clone. So let's zoom out here. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and just crank this up maybe to 500 for right now so we can kind of get a feeling for this. And the nice thing about just using the cards, right, they stay, the scene stays nice and responsive. So I'm going to add a camera to our scene. And when our scene rotates around here, let me enable the camera. When our scene rotates around, we want the trees to always face the camera. Okay. So on the cloner here, I'm going to select MoGraph, Effector, and we're going to do Target. And for the target object, we want that to be the camera. So now as we move around here, those cards are always facing the camera. Now, if we get above the trees, it kind of gets a little weird because the cards try and orient themselves to be facing towards the camera. I want them to rotate along the y-axis here. Okay, so on the tree, let's go ahead and right-click and do Cinema 4D tags, and we're going to add a protection tag. And I'm going to turn position off, scale off, and on rotation, let's just do the pitch. And so now, right, they stay vertical when I get above it, but as I rotate around from the side, they stay facing the camera. So that works out pretty well. All right, very good. Now with the cloner, let's also go ahead and add a little randomizing. Okay, And for the effector, or for the parameter, I'm going to turn off position, and we're going to turn on scale, uniform scale, and I just want our trees to be, a little bit different sizes here. Okay. And the other thing that we want to do, let's go ahead and turn on our elevation, or our model here. The other thing I want to do is I want to eliminate the trees that are up in the snow, right? We want, as the elevation go up, we want the trees to be eliminated just like they would be in real life. So on the cloner, I'm going to go ahead and go MoGraph, effector, and I'm going to apply a shader effector. Alright, so on the shader, we're going to go to shading. And for shader, we're going to go ahead and apply effects, and we're going to apply terrain mask. Now on the terrain mask here, I'm going to turn off enable slope masking. And one thing that I've discovered when using this on a shader is it's a lot easier if you reverse your gradient here. Okay. You can, obviously, I'm going to use global coordinates, and you can invert it, but it makes guesstimating what the altitude is a little bit harder. Okay, so I found that if you inverse this gradient, you can use the minimum altitude and maximum altitude just like you have been. So for minimum altitude, we want it to be 0 because I want the trees to go all the way down the bottom. And let me jump over to my plane and kind of just take a look at about what the maximum elevation is here. And maybe 118. Let's try that and just see. Now, one thing that we want to do though is under our shader for parameter, we want the scale to be absolute scale, and so we want to change this to -1. Okay, so it's going to completely eliminate the trees that are within that range. So now if we go back to shading and our terrain mask, as we change this elevation, right, we can eliminate those trees. And so I haven't put the texture on yet, just because we're trying to get something close here. Okay, before we add it, just trying to keep things fast. Okay. Now, the other thing that tends to happen with trees is as they go up in elevation, they tend to get smaller too. Okay, so with the cloner selected, let's go to MoGraph, effector, and let's just do a plane effector. And under fall off, I'm going to change this to linear. And let's rotate this thing around. Oop. If I can. All right. And under parameter, let's change to just scale. We want uniform scale. And let's go absolute scale, and let's go smaller. And let's see. So as we bring this down, right, the ones that are higher up the hill should get smaller faster. And under fall off, let's maybe change it to 100%. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, let's go ahead and add a texture to our plane. And so under color, let's go ahead and bring in tree number 1. And I'm going to copy this, come down here to, I'm going to turn specular off, come down here to alpha, and I'm going to paste that in there. And that's good to go. And let's go ahead and apply that to our plane. And just to make things a little bit random, let's go ahead and duplicate that. So let's call this one tree 1. Let's come into this one, tree 2. Let's call this our base. This is veg. Alright, tree 2. Let's go ahead and for the alpha, let's bring in our second variation of the tree. I'm going to copy this, go over to color. I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. And for the tree here under the cloner, I'm just going to hold down Control and duplicate it. Make sure it's in there. Let's go ahead and actually name these as well. So we have tree 1 and tree 2. And let's go ahead and apply tree 2 there. Okay. Now one thing we're probably going to have to do is make some adjustments to the color. And under the cloner, so one nice thing about placing the trees on these cards is that we can really crank up the number of trees. So I'm going to, just for fun right now, bring this up to 8,000. Okay, and it slows it down a little bit, but not too bad. I might actually bring that down here in a minute. Let's do a little bit of a preview and see what we've got going on. Alright, so right now the trees are obviously not looking right for the scene. Let's go ahead and adjust the lighting real quick. Okay, so for this, a really quick, easy way to light this that looks pretty quick, well, it looks pretty good, fairly quick, is if we add a physical sky to this. Now, time and location, let's see, I might change this to, let's say May, and I'm going to go for something a little bit more. Let's see what we get here. Okay, so far this is looking pretty good. Let me show you some ways to make some adjustments in here, because like for me right now the trees are a little bit maybe too bright and maybe a little bit too saturated. Let's take a look at how we can play with this. Let's go into tree 1, and for color, if I change the texture here to layer and we go into our layer, we have obviously our bitmap images, but now we can add an effect, and so we can change the hue, saturation, lightness, and also the brightness, contrast, and gamma. So I'm going to add the HSL, and for the saturation I'm going to bring it down just a little bit. Okay, and for the lightness I might bring that down as well, and I think I might want to increase the contrast just a little bit. Okay, and then I might want to do the same thing for our second tree. Just bring the saturation down just a little bit. And I'm going to maybe do these a little bit different amount just so that we have some variation in our trees. We can see them over here just so they're not all the same. Okay, and I could do maybe even a third tree and a fourth tree, just variations of these two, and change their values as well, just to really give this a lot of variation. So let me do a little preview here and see what it looks like. Okay, so I can tell already that the larger tree, I want some more contrast in there. It's not looking quite right. So let's come in here to the, oh, and I did -3. I want to increase the contrast. Just render a little region here. Okay, and I like that. That looks good. Now, one thing about using these cards as textures, sometimes it's a little bit soft. So we might want to come in here and add a sharpen filter. Okay, and let's try 20% and see how that looks in here. Okay, and obviously too, instead of applying sharpening in Cinema here, we can apply sharpening in a in our post-processing. If we're just rendering a still, obviously Photoshop or After Effects or whatever your program of choice is. I want to take this time to point out a little bit of a gotcha here, because you may run into this problem. These trees, obviously, since they have an alpha channel, we get to a point where we get so many layers stacked on top of each other that have an alpha channel, and light cannot go through there. So if we take a look at this ridge back here, okay, you can see that it's totally black. And that's because the density of trees is so high and they have alpha channels that the light is not penetrating through those cards and reaching our base channel there. Okay, so if we come in here into settings and under options, we want to change the ray depth. Okay, and this is saying how deep can the rays go. And so we need to increase this when we have so many objects with an alpha channel. So let me just change this maybe to 30. And let's go render region. And let's hit this area where that ridge is. And we want to get rid of that black. There we go. Let's render a little bit bigger region. Okay, because we want the light to go all the way through to light it up. And you know, we can actually just crank this up. Let's just crank it up to 80. Okay, so increasing that setting is going to help make sure that you don't get those black bands in there from having all those alpha channels stacked on top of one another. Okay, there you have it. There is the technique for adding textures to our DEM models to make them, to give us, you know, a little more realistic render. And I hope you have fun with this. There's a lot of cool things you can do with the terrain shader. It's pretty powerful once you start using it to texture just certain regions of your image. And remember, with this technique of using these cards for placing our trees in there, we can crank this up fairly high. Let's see, I'm going to try 12,000 and just see if we can handle this here. But also, I really encourage you to check out that collage shader. It's a super powerful plugin. Check it out. It's awesome to be able to create textures right inside of Cinema 4D. I just barely even scratched the surface with what you can do with it. Okay, so check it out. I hope you have fun with this technique. If you create something cool with it, shoot me a link. As always, I'd love to see it. Have fun.